Blood Omen 2 Legacy of Kain was developed by Crystal Dynamics, published by Eidos Interactive, and was released in early 2002. It takes place several centuries after the ending of the first Blood Omen title, and opens with Kain being brought back to life by a resistance group of vampires known as the Cabal. The Cabal are in desperate need since the vampires in the land of Nosgoth are in danger of extinction. Kain is Cabal's final hope, so they bring him back to life even though he's not exactly the easiest person to work with. Kain was dethroned and nearly killed by someone known as the Seraphan Lord 2 centuries prior to the beginning of Blood Omen 2, and a lot has changed since Kain was ruling Nosgoth. One of the biggest strong points of this series is its story, and I don't want to spoil what it has in store, so let's just jump into Blood Omen 2 and see how it turned out. The game starts with Kain being given a rundown of his vampiric abilities one by one by a character named Uma. This section serves as a tutorial for the player and teaches things like jumping, combat, and Kain's need to feed on blood often. Kain doesn't just bite the neck of his prey, he rips the blood from his victims' bodies and sucks them dry. It's kind of a crazy display to see, and you'll be seeing it very, very often throughout the game. Blood not only serves as a life force to Kain, but is also how he gets stronger. The more blood he consumes, the more health he gets over time. There are boxes that can be found, usually in hidden spots, that can help Kain level up. Some of these give him experience points, and others imbue any weapon he is carrying with magic. Also, even though Kain is a vampire and is strong, he can only withstand a few hits from most enemies before being dispatched. So killing every enemy in sight, draining their blood, and leveling up as often as possible is definitely worth doing. Kain can also be killed instantly by falling into water, and there happen to be bodies of water everywhere in the game. Thankfully, there are checkpoints throughout the game stages, and they tend to be quite fair with their placement. I found that right before a difficult battle there was a checkpoint, which helped the game be a lot less frustrating. However, one gripe I have is that during the entire game, none of the cutscenes are skippable. There happen to be a lot of cutscenes that occur right after a checkpoint is reached, so if the player dies, they have to watch the cutscene again. This is a trend in gaming that I don't really see anymore, and I'm happy about that. The one place this doesn't happen, though, is the beginning of boss fights. If a player dies, they're just respawned at the beginning of the fight. However, there are still cutscenes between the boss's phases, and those are not skippable. Thankfully, they usually aren't very long. And another aspect of Blood Omen 2 is platforming. Thankfully, it works well, and Kain gets an ability early on that allows the player to aim his jumps, and this is a great thing for jumping long distances and not having to worry about missing them. The regular jumping also works because Kain's jumps can be controlled after the jump begins by pressing jump a second time. This allows him to descend slowly with a glide. So let's talk about combat. Kain can use his claws as well as weapons while fighting. The weapons range from swords to a double-bladed staff, and they can't really take much abuse before breaking. Thankfully, weapons can be picked up from most dead enemies, but Kain's claws get the job done for the most part, and they're fast. Plus, they don't break. Kain can lock onto enemies and block their attacks. Enemy attacks come in the variety of regular, strong, and unblockable. The strong attacks have a color of yellow to alert the player that they're coming, and the unblockable attacks are red. Kain can dodge to the left or right while he's locked on, so he must do so in order to not be hit by the unblockable attacks. The strong ones will only knock him backwards if they're blocked. The combat in Blood Omen 2 is not too bad. It's much slower than something like Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, but my big issue with the combat was having dodges just not happen for some reason. Also, that having fights with enemies in small, narrow spaces means you can't dodge the way you want to, and having an unblockable attack hit you will take most of Kain's health away. Other than that, the combat was bearable. There are a decent variety of enemy types in the game, but the funny thing is that most of the enemies in the early and middle parts of the game are by far the most difficult. Some of the enemies in the later stages of the game don't even have unblockable attacks, so they're a breeze to fight. Kain can also use a very strong attack ability after building up a meter from blocking attacks. This helps fights be a lot easier, and the attack abilities he gets throughout the game get stronger and stronger. By the end of the game, he can just set enemies on fire with his mind. This is just incredibly satisfying. Another issue I have with the game is draining people of blood. My problem isn't that you have to do it, but just that it takes so long to do. I probably spent an hour or two of my playtime just staring at the animation of Kain sucking out a jet stream of blood. Now don't get me wrong, it looks awesome, but it takes up a bit too much time in my opinion. Also, fighting multiple enemies at once can be problematic, so I'm glad that through most of the game the developers only make the player fight 2 enemies at once. There's maybe one time I can remember having to fight 3 at once, and that was very late in the game. One of Kain's abilities that can help make combat scenarios much easier is Mist. If there's fog on the ground, Kain can turn himself pretty much invisible and can stealth kill enemies if he gets behind them. Every weapon has a different animation for the kill, so watching all of these was a lot of fun. Kain also doesn't go for the throat when he kills someone from behind, he goes for the stomach. Ouch. Boss fights in the game were also not just straightforward fights. They all had some sort of puzzle element thrown in, and I really liked these for the most part. There was only one fight I was kind of annoyed with, but it still wasn't a bad fight. Okay, so now let's get into another large part of the game. The puzzles. I think the puzzles in Blood Omen 2 are really fun and well done. There are several throughout the game, but they never got annoying. They always involve things like rerouting power so Kain can make it through a gate that's barring his way, trying to find a way across a path blocked by water, or even unleashing a demon on some unsuspecting enemies. There are a wide variety of them in Blood Omen 2, and some of them have to deal with using Kain's abilities to get things done, like charming people into pulling switches that Kain can't reach. The game also has some funny ways of showing you how the elements of some puzzles work.
Don't touch it! I heard it's magical and dangerous.
Oh, they say that about everything. The workers move them all the day. Come on, won't do any harm to...
Some people might get tired of the puzzles, but I honestly didn't mind them at all. They made for a good break in between combat sections, and since the combat is pretty repetitive, I liked having these peppered in. The stages of Blood Omen 2 are quite varied, taking place in the streets, warehouses, docks, a factory, a wharf, sewers, a prison, canyons, and more. The fact that there are so many different types of areas that usually introduce new enemy types and puzzles helps keep the player interested in what might come next. The graphics in Blood Omen 2 are definitely showing their age nowadays, but that doesn't mean that the game looks bad by any means. The Gamecube version that I used ran really smoothly and looked just like the PC version when I upscaled it 3 times its native resolution. As a matter of fact, it looked better because I had some of the cool little visual effects that didn't seem to be in the PC version. I used a gecko code as well that allowed for the game to run at 16:9 and didn't seem to be stretched at all, which is fantastic. Out of all the versions of this game, I would say the GameCube and Xbox versions are the best in my opinion. I did run into one glitch that I found very funny at the end of a cutscene though. I couldn't help but laugh at it. There are a few other visual glitches where Kain might get stuck on a part of the stage and the screen would vibrate violently. These didn't happen very often, they weren't in any way game-breaking from what occurred during my playthrough. Enemies will also clip through objects like boxes or walls, but thankfully they don't clip all the way through them. Oftentimes though, the player won't be able to pick up a weapon if an enemy dies too close to a wall, because the weapon they drop will actually clip all the way through. The music and voice work is really well done in Blood Omen 2. Sometimes the music is just ambient, dark-sounding tones lightly droning as Kain explores, and then it ramps up into a quicker and louder theme during battle. This is also a great way to know when an enemy has spotted Kain. I found the music to be really pleasant throughout the game. It all fit the mood of the game very well, and as far as the voice work goes, Simon Templeman does a great job as Kain. He brings so much snark and just overall dickishness to the character that if he was played any other way, it just wouldn't be as interesting. The game seems to use some sound clips from the first Blood Omen at times, like the civilians who are chained to walls saying, "Help me, kind sir," and Kain's laugh after he slaughters them and drinks their blood. The sounds used in the game are compressed a good bit, and a lot of them are just stock sound effects. But there's nothing wrong with that because they get the job done, and the sound design is good. Everything from the clashes and clangs during combat, the sounds of burning torches on a castle wall, and even the different sounds Kain's footsteps make when walking on different surfaces all show a nice attention to detail. So, would I recommend Blood Omen 2 Legacy of Kain? Yes, I would. While it's not perfect, it's still a fun game to play on a weekend if you want a nostalgic trip into some gothic horror action. I'd say my playthrough was about 10 hours long, so there's a good bit to sink your teeth into, because the game can still be purchased for a relatively low cost on all its platforms nowadays. Not everyone will enjoy the repetitive combat or puzzles, but if what you've seen here looks like something you might like, I would definitely say check it out.